Making sure looks like we're good to go. We're recording. All the things are working. All right. We changed our setup a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what it was, but
I think you started looking at how much time you spend putting things together and like setting up.
Yeah, I mean that was definitely part of it, but I'm trying to figure out like why was the studio such a mess?
It was a mess.
It was.
I hated coming in. We have our studio in our bedroom
Mm-hmm.
because we have a little sitting area off of our.
Yeah, in fact, that lamp right there is on my bedside table.
Yeah.
And our bed is like right behind that. So that's kind of the angle. Before, the camera was like over there facing this way.
Mm-hmm.
So getting a little bit more of a peek into our room.
It's a nice little, nice little area. I kind of set it up as a library, and then you took over.
Yeah.
With all of the video stuff, so.
Yeah, so it had gotten really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember for the life of me why I was like, this needs to change. But I guess part of it really is like everything, all of the light stands, the microphones, everything was kind of just on its own stand. It was everywhere.
Mm-hmm. There were a lot of cords. The cords get me.
Right, and I would have to tear it down and set it back up every week.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that had to do with where it was in the room. The fact that it was, and having everything here in this, it's kind of like in the corner, but it's next to all of the outlets, and it's not, it doesn't, where it was before, it kind of closed off the space. And so I think things naturally, because the space
open,
was, so it feels a lot more open now and
when
relaxing.
I come in our bedroom, I don't feel like angsty.
Angsty?
Mm-hmm. I feel more like, it's like the only place in the house where I feel relaxed because everything is in its place, and I prefer order,
Yeah.
So
well,
I don't like chaos.
Speaking of being relaxed, let's get into today's topic. We'll go ahead and do the intro and jump in. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oops. Hold on. Something's messed up here. Welcome to In the Boat with Ben and Rachel. I'm Ben.
And I'm Rachel.
And this show exists to be an encouragement and a motivator for creators. We are creators who work full-time from home. We've got a large family, and so we're kind of balancing our creativity, our passions with day-to-day responsibilities and trying to figure it out as we go. And so we hope that as we talk about these different topics, our experiences can help you feel less alone in your struggles, feel like you've got a companion on your creative journey. And so that's what we're doing.
Yep.
Today we're talking about rest, the role of rest in creativity. And I thought it might be good to start out by defining what we mean when we say the word rest. We didn't talk about this before, so I'm curious to know what you think of when you hear the word rest as it relates to creativity.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and say this disclaimer, which is I am not good at resting. And when I think of rest, I think about, taking time away, not having expectations, really being kind of free with your time. And it's like this it's like this ideal of what I sometimes wish I could be, this person who doesn't feel chained to the clock or have to have a to-do list even if you have a day off. So, I mean, when I when I think of rest, those are the things that come to my mind, and I've had to sort of redefine them for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we have an expectation of what rest looks like, and it's vacation and, doing things that are out of the ordinary. And I have a really hard time just relaxing.
Have you ever taken a vacation? And this, I've heard this, like I've seen people post this before and talk about it. So I feel like at this point it's kind of a meme almost. Like you get back from a vacation
And you're more tired.
you need another vacation to
Yeah.
recover from your vacation.
Yeah, I mean,
And people might say, well, then you're doing it wrong. But like,
I think some of that is just being out of your normal routine. And, I mean, when we've taken the boys to Disney World, I don't feel tired, but I feel exhausted when we get back because
Yeah.
it's just, it's logistics and all of those things.
well, I've taken 2 trips this year. One was for a team retreat in
Mhm.
Washington, D.C., and then the other one was for a creator conference. And even though I didn't have like the day-to-day household stuff that I had to take care of, I didn't have any real work responsibilities. It took me probably both times, it took me a good week and a half to really recover.
Just get back into
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
So-
What is your definition of rest?
Yeah, so I was going to say I don't necessarily think of those kinds of things as restful. So I have 2 different ways of thinking about this. One is kind of what you would expect when you think of rest. You might think of, taking time off.
Naps. I was just kidding.
Naps, yeah. You might think of naps. You might think of meditating. You might think of reading, doing something recreational, reading your favorite book or doing a hobby. And those, there's, I've just listed a few, but there are so many different things I think that can fall under that umbrella of what constitute restful activities. But from person to person, that answer might be different.
Right. It's
And-
almost like an experimentation. You have to experiment with what feels restful to you.
Yeah. So this is kind of the definition I am adopting, because this is something that I'm kind of working through right now. It kind of has to do with how rest and recovery are treated in professional athletics. So it's not as much about the specific activity, but it's about the strategy behind using rest as a part of. And so I think the broader conversation around rest in the creator community has been great. It's been something that people are talking about more. It's becoming more acceptable as like, oh, this is, people need to take breaks. We want to avoid burnout. We're kind of leaving that hustle culture behind, and I think that's fantastic. But I think it's even more tactical. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's more tactical. It's like, no, rest is just like any like some software that you download or some online community that you join so that you can network with people, or some skill that you learn, or some productivity framework you use. Like, rest falls under the same category as any one of those other things. It's a part of your strategy to being a successful creator. It's an essential part, and if it's missing, things break down. Just like if any one of those other things are missing that are essential to your business or to your creative work, it breaks down.
Well, and I would want to interject here a little bit about, I know a lot as a runner. I know a lot about how you're supposed to recover. I don't always do it well, but every time you run, you're getting micro tears in your muscles. And so if you continue to run every single day, you're just continuously getting micro tears. You can repair those somewhat overnight, but it's really, really important to take a rest day that where your muscles can repair. It's the same in like strength training and everything. You're making your muscles stronger in the recovery days because that's when they're repairing themselves. And if you think about it in terms of that in creative work, you know, I know it's not true, but let's just say you're creating micro tears in your brain every time you're using it in your creative work, and your brain needs that rest time to restore itself, you know? And I think even though we're not really getting micro tears in the brain, it is true that our creative work is taxing our brains. And in order for our brains to continue producing creative work, it's essential that we take time off with no expectation. Sometimes when I'm taking a week off, I'll still write, but it's on something completely different than my work in progress. Or if I just have, some kind of inspiration, but just taking that time away from it, I feel like is really important for the brain.
Yeah. So, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I do want to kind of dig in a little bit to some of these natural processes that include rest as a part of growth.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it works that way, and it's well established that it works that way in physical activity,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're trying to improve your running speed or you're trying to increase, like you're trying to build muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And so cognitively, the daily rhythm of rest plays an important role in helping remove toxins from the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So like that in and of itself is getting enough sleep for that process to actually work through its completion is a part of your creative work. Because what happens when you haven't gotten enough sleep and you sit down to do something creative, the ideas don't come as easily.
Yeah.
You feel a little bit more frustrated and irritated. Your
Mm-hmm.
mood's not as good. There are so many things we could talk about specific to sleep itself.
Yeah.
But I think there's even more to it than that. So we have this kind of I think scientific basis for the role of rest in a lot of different processes that we experience. And I think that we are now starting to have more theoretical conversations around,
Mm-hmm.
okay, what does rest look like? Like what is the actual function of it? And that's the turn that I'm trying to make, is not from thinking about it like this abstract concept of like, oh, if I'm burning out, it means that I need to do more yoga. Like how can we take it from something that we're kind of guessing at to something that we think of as like we would any other part of,
like strategically.
Yeah. Like when you sit down to write, for example, and you're trying to reach a certain number of words per minute,
Mm-hmm.
there are things like little decisions and little adjustments you've made in your writing process over time that get you to a specific word count goal. Like maybe you decide, I'm not going to go back and correct typos as I go. I'm not going to worry about whether or not I'm saying this exactly how I would want to say it. So like you make these decisions along the way, and as you experiment, you find something that works really well for you. And so it's a more experimental, more scientific approach. I think that's kind of the thing I want to do more of. And that way, I can have a better understanding of what types of rests. So for me, is it going for a walk? Or is it shutting my computer and doing a meditation session? Or is it reading a book? Or is it sitting down with my guitar and playing music? Like what are the things that help me come back to my creative work with
Invigorated,
invigorated,
excited.
with more energy, with more passion, with more ideas.
Yeah. And it's important to work some of those things into our day-to-day process. But I've always been one who also advocates for, taking a whole week off. And I try to do that around every 7 weeks or every 8 weeks, depending on our kids' school schedules and stuff. I try to kind of line those things up because I don't get much done anyway when they're on holiday from school. And it allows me the freedom to feel like I can just be with them if I wanted to. A lot of times on my rest weeks, I'll just read, like, a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I probably read 5 or 6 books on my sabbatical weeks, but I feel like it's just such an important time to refill the brain with what I've emptied. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you have this cup that you're constantly pouring out, and then you take this time away and you can refill it a little bit.
So if you're thinking about the things that you're already doing, the next step is really asking this question, like, if you were to rate on a scale from 1 to 10, you've done this for years now, right?
Yeah,
Like you've
it's
taken
been
this
years.
kind of,
Mm-hmm.
If you were to rate on a scale from 1 to 10, how do you feel when you come back to your creative work?
Honestly, so on a scale from 1 to 10,
Yeah.
what is 10?
10 is the most
Excited?
creative, excited, and passionate and inspired you've ever felt. And one is like, I have no ideas. Everything I make is
Yeah.
terrible.
No, I think it depends on the week for sure, but there are definitely sabbatical weeks where I'll come away with 4 or 5 new book ideas where I'm like, gosh, I already have such a long list. But it makes me excited, it makes me excited to get back to my work and finish the projects I'm working on so that I can start on new ones. I'd say it's probably around, most of the time, around like a 9, 8 or 9,
Yeah.
probably. And by Friday of the week when I take a week off, so I'll usually take Saturday and Sunday also, but by Friday I'm like, I cannot wait to get back. I have so many things that I want to write about, and so, yeah.
So the question I probably should have asked first, because I think that's really good information. What number are you at before, like right before you take your sabbatical?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that probably depends on the week in the project too, but I'd say on average it's maybe like a 5. I have a lot of passion for what I do, but
Yeah.
because I am a very task-oriented person, I tend to get a little bit, I exhaust myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I pour out and I pour out and I don't take breaks very well daily. So by the time that week comes around, I feel like I really need it,
Yeah.
I might have overestimated. It might be closer to like a 3 or a 4
Yeah, I mean,
when I first start out.
so then the next question I would ask is, are you doing anything to keep track of that?
Not really. I probably should.
And if you do keep track of it, what method would you use? Would you just like keep that in a journal?
I'd probably keep it in a journal, kind of assess how I probably do actually keep track of it because I write in a journal every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I could probably go back to how I was feeling. I write about my feelings and how I'm feeling about projects and where things are in the professional life and everything.
Yeah.
And so I could probably go back and look at that stuff. Might be a little scary. So
I mean, that's super valuable though. So like you
Yeah.
have some practices that are already very conducive to the kind of experimentation we're talking about. Like you're writing about your feelings it's kind of meta because that is a
Yeah.
practice that can be a source of rest and rejuvenation. But it's also like when you look back at that, that is data about your creative work.
And actually, now that I think about it, I think before this last sabbatical, I took a sabbatical a couple of weeks ago. I think I was in I remember telling a writer friend, I feel like I'm just in a really dark emotional place right now. And then by the time I came back, I was like ready to go,
Yeah.
So, I don't know. That's interesting. I guess I've never thought about it. Thanks for asking the question.
Well, and I think like the thing that I want for myself is I want to do a better job of collecting that data.
Yeah.
Because when we're talking about rest, like we asked the question in the beginning, what do you think rest means? A lot of people are going to have a lot of different answers. And so if you have a hunch for yourself about what would feel restful for you, what would or you have some experience with something, then formalizing, I think it's really a matter of taking it from like, oh yeah, when I feel stressed or I feel burned out, this is the thing that I go to. I think it's taking it from this kind of reactive sort of thing that you do to a planned out, a purposeful, like, okay, I'm going to commit to whatever it is. Maybe it's something you do daily, or maybe it's something you do weekly. Maybe it's different things that you do at different intervals. But I'm going to commit to doing it. And as I commit to it, part of that is actually carving out time in your schedule.
Yeah.
That's something I do want to talk about a little bit here in a minute, because I've made some pretty big moves when it comes to my schedule lately.
Yeah.
But it's carving out that time in your schedule and saying, okay, this time is set aside for this restful activity. And when you look at that, you don't think about that as taking a break from your creative work. You think about that as, this is part of my creative work.
Right, yeah.
Just the same way that the athlete thinks about having a recovery day and eating certain types of foods and doing a stretching routine as a part of their fitness journey, or as a part of their training toward, like, the training isn't just what they do on the field, but it's what they do in between. And so that's kind of the way. And then coming up with some method for capturing data about how you're feeling, what is happening during those rest days, where are you before and after you take that rest time, so that you can start to experiment a little bit more and try different things out.
Yeah. And here's the thing about the really cool thing.
I'm going to pause real quick because I need to plug the computer in before it dies.
Oh, okay. Do you have an outlet?
All right, here's the really cool thing.
And here's the really cool thing about creative work too, is that when we take time away, the brain doesn't actually take time away. It's constantly working. We've talked about this before. It's constantly working in the background, even when we don't know it. It's that, subconscious, unconscious part of our brain. And there are times that I've taken a whole week away, and on day 5, I'll be like, I just figured out how to end that story, or I just figured out what was wrong with that story, because the brain is it's constantly working. And when we are working every single day and just grinding through all of that, it doesn't leave enough space. I like to
Yeah.
think of it in terms of giving space. Probably because I'm kind of a person who needs space. Like I don't like being suffocated
Mm-hmm.
and stuff. So if we don't leave enough space, the brain can't come up with the solutions or the creative needs that we have. So
Yeah, because there's again, we're not talking necessarily from a place of expertise, but as far as I understand, there's a different kind of thinking your brain does in outside of the focused working context. So putting your brain in a different context where you're more relaxed, you're focused on other things, um, allows it to work in a different way.
that's why you have ideas in the shower or when you go for a run or
Yeah,
those things.
yeah. So I know there's like real science
Mm-hmm.
and real research behind that, but we don't have that on hand to
Yeah.
cite. But I think that's something that's definitely um, both in research and in many people's experience well established.
So we're actually doing our creative work a favor when I mean, you've already said that, but when we take time away.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about scheduling, and then I had one more question we could kind of go over before we wrap up.
Okay.
But I've done like on and off for several years, different methods for
Yeah.
working with my calendar and stuff like that. I took this approach recently, and I kind of want to do an episode just about this, but I sat down and I worked through all of my goals, and and then I took each of those goals and I came up with action steps. And for almost everything on my list, the most important action step was to set aside time in my schedule every week to do some activity related to that thing. So, for example, one of my goals is to have a healthier, more functional family life. And kind of combined with that was spending more time with my family. I feel like you and I actually get a pretty good amount of time together. Like if we were to take the average,
Yeah.
couple, I think we actually do get to spend a lot of time together. So I'm like, I don't need to spend more time with Grace. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't need to take her on dates.
I do, yeah, I do. But I was like, hey, I want to take you out. Our date night is sitting on our bed over there and watching our favorite shows on TV, and it's wonderful. Like I look forward to it every single week. We have a lot of fun with
We
that.
get a lot of interruptions too.
We do get a lot of interruptions. So if we're away from the house, nobody can interrupt
Nobody
us.
can ask us how to use the remote.
Yeah. But I also, I was like, I do want to spend more time with the boys. And so on my calendar, like in my weekly schedule, I actually put in there, I'm going to, from this time to this time, I'm going to take the boys out on a date. And that could just be a walk in our neighborhood. It could be jumping on the trampoline with them or, but it's just one-on-one time. That was one of my goals. Another goal I had was to organize all of my things, both physical and digital. If you're like me, you have several different stacks of paper that you've been meaning to get to for months, and who knows what's in there and how urgent it is. But it's also, like cables and cords and just all kinds of like, my physical world is not as orderly as I would like for it to be. And my digital world is even worse. Like the way that my files are set up and everything like that, my email inbox, like, so, and it's just kind of this natural thing that happens over time. You don't go back and organize things unless you're a weirdo. And I'm just kidding. You don't go back and organize things, and just eventually, like, it becomes really disorganized. So I set aside a couple of hours a week to actually just focus on organizing stuff. And when I hit the first session this week, I was like, oh, I've got so much stuff I need to do. I don't know if I have time to like actually do that. But then I was like, no, I put it on the calendar. I just have to trust that if I spend my time doing this, the other stuff is going to get taken care of. And for the most part, it did. Like I got all of my stuff done.
Yeah.
But that organizational time, it was just like, oh, this is so great. Like I feel like I'm actually making progress. And then I also, like, while I was doing that, I came up with some ideas for how I could make my work time more efficient. And that really blew my mind.
Yeah.
So this is an anecdotal example. You wouldn't think of organization necessarily as restful. But it's an example of an activity that had a measurable impact on my work, that had I not given myself the time to do it, and kind of experiment with it, it wouldn't have occurred to me that, oh, that is something that can actually make me feel less stressed out, more creative, more energized. So anyways, I found that so interesting. So I hope that story is an encouragement for you to, experiment for yourself and try things out.
Here's a real quick little productivity hack too that I think we may have stumbled upon, because I did the same thing where I wrote on my calendar. I usually have it like on my computer where I'll have due dates for something, but I actually wrote it on my calendar because I work on, we had this whole podcast about how I do everything on paper, and I wrote due dates on paper and actually hit everyone. This was for business stuff because I get a ton of stuff done for writing, but business stuff, I'm always like, I can find something better to do for that time, the time that I have scheduled for it. But because I put deadlines on things this week, I got every single business item done.
I think that's great.
I just think writing it on the calendar, and you have to see it, and you're like, oh.
Yeah, I guess I'll agree and say that if I write something down or if I put it on the calendar,
it's more likely.
It feels more formalized than having this kind of vague idea in my head of like, oh, I'll do this.
Yeah.
So I think for some people that's enough. For other people, you might need to go the step further and tell somebody else about that. Or, put it out there publicly that you're expecting to have something done by a certain time, like adding some layers of accountability.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, even just that simple act of writing it down, maybe it makes it 20 or 25% more likely that you'll get it done. But maybe that for that week, that's enough to actually get you there. So,
that's totally off topic for what we're talking about, but.
So the last thing I wanted to do was answer this question, because I think part of experimentation is having a good idea of like what you're measuring for. And so the purpose of rest is not like in and of itself is not rest. It's not like I'm gonna rest because I want to rest. I think for most people, like if you ask them like, why do you rest, or why do you buy that camera, or why do you use those pens, or it's not because, oh, I just love these pens so much. It's because it makes the writing experience so much more enjoyable. Everything ends up in some way serving your creative work.
Yeah.
And so the question that I have is, what are the things that we're measuring when we're asking, on a scale from 1 to 10, how do you feel when you come back to your creative work? So things come to mind like the frequency or the fidelity of the ideas that come to me, the excitement or the energy that I feel
Mm-hmm.
to get started. Like that feeling of getting out of bed and like
Being excited to do
looking
the
forward
things
to
you,
like,
yeah.
oh, I can't wait to get to that part of my day.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of those measures
I
for you?
I totally agree. I think it's about feeling the same passion that you did in the beginning, because I think as we pour out and pour out, we can still feel the passion, but it's a little it becomes diluted over time because we never refill, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And so I think it's just feeling the passion, even if you're in like a project that feels hard or doesn't feel exciting, just having that feeling of excitement to get back to it anyway and to figure it out, you know. Because I know for writers, we can get to points in our stories where we're like, I have no idea what to do from here, the story is terrible. But you know, a lot of times when I've taken time away, I've shared that sometimes those solutions come, or sometimes it's just a renewed love for getting back to that project, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are the things. And as far as emotional well-being, I think it's more like, I guess this is on a more of a nitty-gritty level for me, because I struggle with clinical depression, and it's more feeling something. Like,
Yeah.
you get back. Why am I getting emotional?
Well, yeah, so it's okay. Tell me a little bit more about that experience, like the experience before, and what, you're saying feeling something, but kind of what that
Yeah.
feels like, and then the contrast when you come back. And
Well, I think sometimes, like, before going on a rest, some of the things feel like they're robotic almost. Like I do the things that I do because I know that I have to do them.
mm-hmm.
And so some of those, you know, some of those writing sessions, some of the runs, that's a big way that I can see how I'm doing emotionally too, is am I excited to get up and run, you know, as simple as that is. But some of them feel more robotic before I take that time away. And then when I've filled myself up for that week, it doesn't feel robotic anymore. It feels more like, this is something I'm doing because I love it.
Yeah. And what does that feel like? I mean, I think there's kind of that cognitive, like, understanding or acknowledgement that, oh, I'm actually loving this. But
Yeah.
like, can you describe?
I'm trying to. I think when I don't want to say it's like when words flow onto the page and stuff like that, because words can flow or words can be stymied and you can still love what you're doing. I think it's more that, like, I have this feeling inside me that it has to be done because this is who I am and what I've been created for.
Yeah.
So, like,
You maybe feel more connected to a sense of purpose.
yeah.
You believe in what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, I think sometimes as creative people, you know, we can fall into those ruts where we're like, what is the point? What is the purpose behind what I'm doing? And I think taking that time away and figuring out what that looks like for you, you know, the rest piece, can reinvigorate you and help you reconnect with your purpose for creating things.
Yeah. Wow. So, I kind of started out asking that question thinking, oh yeah, like maybe we could identify this, this, and this. But it turns out that's a huge question.
Mm-hmm.
What are the things that you think of as the measures for you being able to do your best creative work?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you quantify those things? How do you describe them? Even as I was asking you, you struggle a little bit, and I think just anybody does struggle a little bit to put words to these experiences.
And the feeling that you feel when you're in the place of, it's so hard to describe. Yeah, what you feel when you come back and are excited as you were in the beginning. I remember in the beginning being like, I'm going to change the world, and it's kind of that, like, coming back from the rest, I reconnect with that. I'm going to change the world,
Yeah, because it is easy as you kind of go through your rhythms and
and life
life, sharing your creative work and maybe not seeing the kind of results you were hoping for. It's easy to lose that connection to that passion and that feeling and that belief that your work can make a difference and it can make the world a better place somehow, So I think that's huge. All right. I feel like there's so much more we can unpack with this topic, but we'll have to save it for another show. Thank you for, being vulnerable and opening up about that. Like, I think it's hard for a lot of us to admit that we're working through depression or struggling with kind of a loss of connection to our purpose. So I hope that resonates with folks out there and that you know that you're not alone. You're not the only one who is experiencing that. And, if you want to talk to somebody about that, kind of share your experiences, we'd love to hear from you. So feel free to, leave a comment if you're watching this somewhere, or you can go to our website, intheboatpodcast.com, and you can drop us a note there. Yeah. So also, get therapy if you can.
Yeah.
I don't ever want to talk about that like it's the end all be all answer for everything, but I think it can play.
No, it helps.
Yeah, it sets you on a path if you get with the right therapist. It sets you on a path to doing the emotional work that's necessary to become more emotionally healthy. So, yeah. Yep. All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening. Rachel, if folks want to find you online, where can they go?
RachelTolson.com.
And you can find me at bentolson.com. I'm also at Ben Tolson on all of the things. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. All right. Yeah, I think I do want to. Gosh, that last question is such a big one, and I feel like I want to just sit down with that and kind of meditate on it and write about it a little bit, maybe, and see like what's there.
I'm all for journaling and just free writing with no purpose of, sharing it with somebody else. I feel like there's just a freedom in exploring a lot of those things. Yeah. And I want to reword the question here, because I would love for folks who are listening to this to also think about it and stuff. But what does it mean to do your best creative work? And what are the features of that? Like with athletes, you've got things like VO2 max, and you've got these measurable things that are we can point to a number of things that if they're at their optimal levels, the athlete is going to perform better.
At their very best. So what are those things for creative work? What are those things for the creative athlete? So
It's an interesting question. I guess I've never really explored it.
And then the other question that like my devil's advocate brain kind of jumps in with is like, is it really that important to maximize your creativity? Like, why does that matter so much?
I don't think it's necessarily to maximize your creativity. I think it's connected to emotional health and
yeah. Well, when I'm doing what I think is my best creative work, I'm generally happier, I think.
Yeah. I think it all wraps around each other. So
when I'm doing what I think is my best creative work, I feel most connected to other people. When I'm doing I keep on qualifying it with what I think is my most creative work, because I'm not sure I can even define that. But when I'm doing my best creative work, I'm actually helping people. I'm more consistent. Yeah, so big questions.
I know. They are big questions. Might have to explore some of those questions, like what is best creative work? What is, in future podcasts.
Yeah. So how about for next week? We'll answer all of the big questions.
Oh gosh. I don't think so.
I'm just kidding. All right. Well, thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.